Beyond its military aggression, Moscow has also worked to undermine Ukraine's democratic institutions. It's interfered in Ukraine's politics and elections. It's blocked energy and commerce to intimidate its leaders and pressure its citizens. It's used propaganda and disinformation to sow mistrust. It's launched cyber attacks on the country's critical infrastructure. Then, starting last March and continuing through the fall, Russia began a massive, unprovoked buildup of military forces and equipment on Ukraine's border. Nearly 100,000 troops today, with plans to mobilize twice that number on very short order. So how does Moscow explain its actions? With disinformation. It claims that Ukraine is threatening Russia, that Ukraine seeks to provoke a conflict, and that the Russian troop buildup and the tanks and heavy artillery are all purely defensive. That's like the fox saying it had to attack the henhouse because its occupants somehow pose a threat. The idea that Ukraine is the aggressor in this situation is absurd. It's Russia that invaded Ukraine nearly 8 years ago. It's Russia that is the military occupier of part of Ukraine in Crimea. It's Russia that to this day is fueling a war in eastern Ukraine. It's Russia that has failed to implement any of its Minsk commitments, indeed is actively violating many of them, and refuses to acknowledge it's a party to the conflict. It's Russia that's taken aim repeatedly at Ukraine's democracy. And it's Russia that's sending troops to Ukraine's border once again. Diplomacy is the only responsible way to resolve this crisis. We are fully committed to meaningful, reciprocal dialogue with Russia, just as we're fully committed to consulting and coordinating with our allies and partners, including the European Union, in all our discussions in all formats. We would far prefer a diplomatic path and a diplomatic solution to a crisis that Russia has brought forth. That's what next week's meetings of the U.S.-Russia Strategic Stability Dialogue, the NATO-Russia Council, and the OSCE are all about. And we believe that there are areas where we can make progress. If Russia has legitimate concerns about our actions, the United States, our NATO allies, our OSCE partners are willing to hear them and to try to address them, if the Kremlin is prepared to reciprocate regarding its own dangerous and destabilizing behavior. But again, it has to be a two-way street. Our goal is to have a relationship with Russia that is predictable and stable, so that we can cooperate when it's in our mutual interest and address our differences with an open and frank dialogue. It'll be very difficult to make actual progress if Russia continues to escalate its military buildup and its inflammatory rhetoric. And we've been clear with Russia about what it will face if it continues on this path, including economic measures that we haven't used before, massive consequences. That clarity has been powerfully echoed in recent weeks by the G7, the world's leading democratic economies, by the European Union, and by NATO. So we hope Russia makes a different choice. And again, we're fully committed to diplomacy and to seeing if we can produce results. We have questions about the nature of the request, why it came about. We're seeking to learn more about it. It would seem to me that the Kazakh authorities and government certainly have the capacity to deal appropriately with protests, to do so in a way that respects the rights of protesters while maintaining law and order. So it's not clear why they feel the need for any outside assistance, so we're trying to learn more about it. We certainly call on those peacekeeping forces and law enforcement to adhere to international human rights standards to support a peaceful resolution. There are very particular drivers of what's happening in Kazakhstan right now, as I said, that go to economic and political matters. And what's happening in there is different from what's happening on Ukraine's borders. Having said that, I think one lesson of recent history is that once Russians are in your house, it's sometimes very difficult to get them to leave.